Thank you, Rick. Well, today we are launching into our new series, and this is our theme for this year, and we're calling it Look Up. And one of the things that I've just become convinced of over this last year is that it's really easy to get very caught up in what's going around us in the here and now, in our circumstances, on what other people are saying, on what's happening, on what's going to happen next, on what we're trying to predict that's going to happen next. And it's been rough, and it seems like the rougher it gets, the easier it is to get so caught up in it. And so what I want to call us to do is to look up in those moments. To just be able to say to each other, to say to ourselves, look up right now. Look up. Look up and remember who our God is in the midst of this. Remember what He is like. To remember the anchor that His nature and His perfection is for our souls. We want to look up. And so I want to just encourage you to kind of own this, to grab a hold of this and say, okay, I'm in with this, right? There's a study guide we provided for you to do, kind of following up from the sermon. The community groups are going to be doing them. There's a couple of copies on the table here. It's also in emails. But man, just commit yourself that this is going to be one of your mottos this year, that as circumstances begin to overwhelm, as you find yourself beginning to get obsessed or caught up with everything going on around you, that you'll commit to saying to yourself, okay, take a deep breath and look up. Remember who your God is. So we're going to be doing that over the next 4 weeks and hopefully through the rest of this year. But as we do, we're going to start this morning really with a passage in Acts chapter 17. So I'm going to begin by reading it. Acts chapter 17, and this is in the middle of, and really the core of, Paul's sermon on Mars Hill in the Areopagus, the men of Athens, okay? And this is what he says about God. He goes back to this idea of who is God. That's where he starts with these philosophers that he's speaking to. Acts chapter 17, we're just going to read verses 24 and 25. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. Our God does not need anything. That's what we're going to look at today. So, as we get started, I want to talk to the kids for a minute, and all of you, but I want to especially include the kids. So if you're a kid, raise your hand. Okay, good. Thank you. And kids, I have a question. How many of you like science and animals and stuff like that? Isn't that interesting stuff? So tell me if you've ever heard of an animal called a tardigrade. Tardigrade. Anybody ever heard of a tardigrade? How about any adults? Any adults heard of a tardigrade? A couple of you. You smart guys out there. That's good. Tardigrade. So a tardigrade, you probably haven't seen a tardigrade, and there's a reason, because they're microscopic, okay? They're also known sometimes as water bears, but they're these microscopic, eight-legged, puffy-looking little animals, okay? And microscopic, I mean, you got to have a microscope. We talked about microscopes last week. You got to have a microscope to see them, okay? Now, one of the amazing things about tardigrades is their ability to survive even without food, okay? They curl up into a special position, and it's a little bit like hibernating, but they slow their bodies down, and they can survive over 30 years without food, probably much longer. Isn't that amazing? An animal that doesn't have to eat for over 30 years? You believe that? They don't need food. Now, we think about that, and we're amazed. How could an animal not need food for over 30 years? And the reason why we're amazed by that is we know that animals, living creatures, need food. They need to have nutrients coming in their bodies to survive, right? And so do we as humans, right? You need food, right? I bet you tell your parents that all the time, like, I need food or I'm going to starve, right? And it's been like 2 hours since you ate a full meal and you're already like, I'm dying of starvation, I need food, right? I've heard you, right? We know we need food to survive. We're amazed by tardigrades, and you could go learn more about them. There's probably some cool videos on them. But here's the deal. Even tardigrades eventually need food. We're not sure how long it would be until they needed food, but eventually they would need food. Even in their kind of hibernating state, they still have that need for food. They can't live without it. Now here's something far more amazing. Every creature we know needs food, water, those basics. But God does not need anything. Ever. He never needs food. He never needs water. He doesn't need anyone or anything ever. Period. Isn't that amazing? Everyone else needs things, but God does not. He is always enough in himself. He never needs help. He never needs advice. He never needs sleep. He never needs anything. Period. Now this morning, we're going to dive in deeper to that. This big truth that our God does not need anything. He is independent. And we're going to see why that's such good news for us. So point number one that we want to look at is this. Number one, we are needy. So we're going to look at ourselves first. We are needy. Have you ever tried to see how long you can hold your breath? Right? Maybe you go underwater and you try to see how long you can hold your breath. And maybe you can hold it for a minute. We're all impressed with that. I would be impressed with that. I'm pretty sure I couldn't do that. If you can hold your breath longer than a minute, we're impressed. Why? Because we need to breathe. Like, we can't live without breathing. We're dependent on that oxygen getting into our lungs and getting through our body. We need it. Let me ask you another question. Have you ever tried running? I would not recommend it, okay? But when you try to run a long distance, you realize you have physical limitations, right? For me, it seems like it's mostly my lungs that hit those limitations first, right? They feel like they're going to explode, and I'm just breathing and start to hyperventilate or whatever, right? We have limitations. Or have you ever tried to go without sleep? Did a little research. Some high school kid years ago he set the world record. He went without sleep for 11 days, right? And he was like hallucinating, and it got a little weird, right? But I'm pretty sure I couldn't do it. I have limitations. We all, even this kid that went without sleep for 11 days, right? Just ask my family. They tell you that I need sleep. It's not pretty when I don't, right? We need things. And those are just physical things, right? We could go further. Think about relationships. One of the things I think this last year has shown us is that we need people in our lives, like real people, face to face. We need this kind of thing. We need interaction, right? When we don't have those friendships and relational interactions, we struggle. It's hard. We need it to be fulfilled, healthy people, right? And a lot of us get really weird when we aren't around other people too, right? We need these things. Or consider knowledge, right? How do you know what you know? Well, you know it because you've either needed the experience to learn it or you needed someone to tell you. You weren't born with knowledge. You didn't come up with things on your own. You really didn't. What you know is because someone taught you. They told you, you read it, whatever. You needed to have someone inform you. And listen, you still don't know nothing, right? Just because you have Google doesn't mean you know a lot of things. Just because, whatever, you watch some Instagrammer on some topic or listen to some news channel doesn't mean you have all the facts and know everything. You're limited, right? We're limited. We are needy and limited creatures. And this is one of those areas, I think, where we start to get really strange ideas about ourselves. It's almost like those carnival mirrors, right? Where you look in the mirror. If you've ever experienced that, they're these special mirrors, and you look at them, and all of a sudden you look really tall, far taller than you are, right? Or you can look in this other mirror and you look really wide, far wider than you are, right? Or you look wavy or whatever, right? It distorts us, and we get distorted when it comes to our need. We forget that, no, we're not unlimited. We have limits and needs. We get really strange ideas about how we are the exception, and we don't need help, and we don't need advice. We don't need other people. We don't need sleep. I'm Superman or I'm Superwoman. I can do it all. And then we realize we can't, right? Sometimes we get this distortion from the comparison games we play, right? That person clearly is living on the edge financially. They don't have it together financially. But me, I'm financially independent. Are you? No, probably not. You're probably dependent on your job, or dependent on the stock market, or dependent on whatever, right? Or you think about your health, and wow, that person's health is rough, or they're getting older, I'm seeing it break down. But me, I'm healthy. I can do anything. And then you break your leg or something, right? And you're, oh, are you really that independent? Or do you need things like food and sleep to stay healthy? Or you could think about, again, knowledge, and you think, boy, that person doesn't know as much as they think they do. I'm kind of an expert in this area. And then, are you really? Are you really just inherently have all of the knowledge in that area that could ever be imagined? Or maybe there are things you don't know. Any wealth or strength or knowledge that you do have actually came from God. It didn't originate with you. We are far more limited and far more dependent than we realize. Reality is we can't take a single breath. We can't think a single sane thought. We can't exist a single moment unless God gives it to us. Unless he holds us together. Did you notice that part in Acts 17? The end of verse 25, it says, he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything else. If you have life, it's because God gave it to you. If you have breath this second, it's because God gave it to you. And then he just says everything else, right? You know what everything means? It means everything, right? He gives that to you. You are completely dependent and needy before God. And we haven't even touched your greatest need, your spiritual need, right? Let me ask you a question. Can you make your heart whole? Can you face eternity on your own? Can you somehow mend your relationship with God? Can you do that? Or do you need help? And listen, I'm guessing if you're not a Christian, that maybe you've realized that it's just a bunch of rubbish when people tell you you can do it. Oh, just believe in yourself. Just look within yourself, or just do this or that religious thing, and you've gotten cynical, and I just want to say you're right to get cynical when people talk that way. Because it's silly, ridiculous that we would think we can handle eternity and stand before the living God on our own. We are needy, and I think this is one of the places where the Bible is so beautiful because it is realistic, right? It tells us that we're helpless. We're dead in our sins. We have no righteousness, no relationship with God. We are living in futility, utterly needy every moment before the living God. So this isn't about just needing some help or just going to the doctor to fix us up. We need Jesus to raise us from the dead. That's how needy we are. We needed the Son of God to die for us. That's how needy we are. And that's what he did. That's the good news, right? He did it. The perfect Son of God lived the life we should have lived and died the death we deserve to die. He did it for us. He did everything we needed. And if you will come to him with your need, he will meet it fully. But you have to admit this. You have to admit that you're needy, that you can't do it. You're dependent. So I invite you, come. Come and ask Jesus. Admit your need on every level and just say, Jesus, I need you to save me, to rescue me, to make me new. I need you to do what I cannot. I need your sufficiency. Ask him now. He will save you today. If that's you, we'd love to talk to you more and help you along. Please reach out. Let us know. Here's the big point. Hopefully we've gotten it by now. We haven't fully, because I know we're going to forget this on Tuesday, right? When we think we can do it all. But here's the big point. We're needy. We're limited. And the sooner we know and admit it, the better. So we are needy, number one. Number two, God is not. This is the good news. God is not. Listen again. Just let this sink in here. Acts 17 again. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything. As Paul got up here to speak to the Athenians, he's zeroing in on their conception of God. And he's contrasting the biblical living God with their idols, right? The idols their gods were weak. They needed temples to be built for them. They needed to be fed by the people's offerings. They needed to be aided in their battles with the other gods, right? And you could go on, right? They were kind of slaves to their own lusts and crazy ideas, and they were weak and limited. And Paul just says, listen, the God I'm talking about is not like your gods. Our God does not need help or advice or a house to live in. He has never needed anything or anyone. Listen to what one author says. Jen Wilkins says, for all eternity, he is perfectly provided for in and of himself, needless of any aid, unflagging in strength, never hungry or thirsty, experiencing no lack. Nothing and no one outside of himself offers aid to him. Because he created everything, nothing he has created could possibly be needful for his existence. If it were, then like him, it would have always existed. Our God is self-sufficient, needed by all, needful of nothing. Does God need someone to give him anything? Does he need our money? Does God need for us to somehow pray that he would get stronger? Does he need someone to give him wisdom or counsel or anything else? No, he does not. He needs none of that. He is never taxed. There's never a situation that is too perplexing or too hard for him, where he has to look outside of himself for resources for that. Never. One way of talking about this is to talk about the independence of God. The independence of God is this idea that he doesn't depend on anything else to help him or enable him to exist or any of that, right? In our culture, we like to talk about independence, don't we? Our country is independent. We don't need anybody else. We're independent people. We're self-sufficient. Our teenagers grow in independence. That's a scary time, right? There's this independent thing, right? But actually, none of us are independent. Our country's not independent, actually. And in a sense, politically it is. I know all that. But really, we're not. We're dependent on all sorts of things to exist as a country. And we even as our teenagers get more independent, you know what? Teenagers, bad news, maybe good news. You'll actually always be dependent on other people, right? One way or another. Right? Whether it's, your car broke down and you're dependent on the auto mechanic to fix it, or you're dependent on your job so they'll actually pay you and you can pay for your auto mechanic to fix your car, whom you're dependent on as well, or whatever, right? We're always going to be dependent on other things and people, but God is not. He is independent. He does not depend on anyone for his existence, for his actions, for his knowledge, for his happiness, or anything else. Another way that theologians will often speak about this is with the word aseity. Aseity. Here's your big theological word for today, okay? Everybody say aseity. Okay? Aseity. There you go. It's a Latin term meaning from himself. From himself. What's the idea here? God doesn't come from anyone else, and he doesn't depend on his continued existence on anyone else. He comes from himself. You can't point back to an origin with God or some maker of God, right? He's independent. He's from himself. I think this is what God is getting at when he identifies himself in Exodus 3:14. He's telling Moses, I'm sending you to the people of Israel, and here's who I am. And God says to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent you. What's he saying? He's saying, I just am. I'm not the God who came from this God and this God. I'm not the God of some, material thing in our universe. I'm not confined by that. I didn't come from that, the sun or the river or something like that. I just am. I'm a myself. Self-existent. Aseity. From eternity past, God exists and is fully sufficient in and of himself. And this didn't change from the creation of the world. When God created, he didn't create out of need in himself. He created instead out of his own sufficiency, out of the overflow of his own abundance. And after creation, he has never been dependent on any part of his creation. No, things continue to exist because of the abundance of his own sufficiency. And the same is true of salvation. God doesn't save us because of some sort of need in himself. Acts 17 seems clear there, right? He doesn't save us because he is lonely or he can't be happy without us. God saves us out of the overflow of his own glory. He loves us simply because of his free and joyous choice to love us. That's who he is. So he loves us. And he saves us. And listen, now that we're saved, does he need us? Is he dependent on us? No, he is not. His work and his mission in the world does not depend on us. Instead, he includes us out of the overflow of his own sufficiency. And in fact, including us is a display of his sufficiency, right? Because we don't actually add anything to God accomplishing his mission. Instead, what we do, we actually require more of his sufficiency, right? It's like a kid who helps you, but they're not really helping you. It's actually harder when you do it with them, right? But the joy of the Father is to include us and use us in his mission. And it shows all the more his sufficiency and the reality that he does not need anything. Even when we, quote unquote, serve him, really, he's the one serving us by including us in what he is doing. We need this because I think sometimes subtly we think that God needs us, and what would he do without us, right? But listen, he doesn't. He doesn't. Now, when we think we're giving to God, it's like your 2-year-old who goes into your coin jar and then gives you a gift of money. And you're like, I love your heart, and that's awesome, but you didn't really give me anything, right? That's us giving to God, right? He doesn't need that. It was already his, but he loves it, and as a father, he delights in that. Now think about this for a second. I want you to think about this from another angle. This is good news for us, right? Because consider the alternative. Think about the alternative. If God needed us, if he was dependent on us, think about what that would say about him. Think about how people would manipulate him. God, you need me. I know you need me to do this thing for you. And if I don't do it for you, you're in big trouble because you can't handle it on your own because you need me. And what would people do? Well, God, I'll do that thing for you if you do this thing for me, right? People would be manipulating God twisting his arm, trying to control him all over the place, right? What a disaster that would be. Or think about what would happen if, well, I need you, so I'm going to save you and kind of include you in my plan. But what would happen if maybe at some point he stopped needing us? If that's the basis for him saving us, that he needs us, well, what happens if he stops needing us? Or he finds a better replacement than us that fits his need more than we do? Well, I don't need you anymore. See ya, right? If that's the foundation for our relationship with God, that he somehow needs us, man, we're in trouble. The fact is, he doesn't need us. He just loves us because he loves us, and that will not change. Or think about another angle. Think about what would happen to our world if God somehow needed or depended on us for his mission. If it was dependent on our abilities, he's like, I can't accomplish my mission without this person and these people, and so I need these people. Without them, I don't have the abilities in myself. And think about what would happen. You know what? Nothing would happen, because we are weak, messed up people, and his mission would be a disaster. It would never be accomplished, right? If God were dependent on and needy of us, oh, bad news, right? What a disaster. But the truth is so much better. God does not need us, but he loves us. God does not depend on us, but he includes us. Isn't that good news? God does not need us, but he loves us. God does not depend on us, but he includes us. Man, that's good news. I want to stop for a moment right now and think about how this connects to our hearts, the way we approach life, the way we deal with difficulties, okay? Many of us, as we come up against our neediness, resist it. We deny it. We somehow try to break free of our limitations. Or maybe we just get angry and frustrated at our limitations, right? You ever do that? We try to push through. We look to technology or medical breakthroughs, or we try to go without sleep, or we read and try to become experts. We struggle and flail because we don't want to be limited. We want to be God without need, without limits, not having to depend on anybody. We don't want to depend on anybody. We want to be able to do it ourselves, right? Is anybody here like that? I know some of you are like that. We need to look up. We desperately need to look up and see the one who has no need, who depends on no one and nothing. When we look up, we can be freed from having to try to be self-sufficient on our own. That's him. He's the one that's self-sufficient, who doesn't need anybody. Not me. I don't fit in that category. And because that's him, I can accept my limitations as a part of God's design. I can accept my neediness, right? Because this didn't start with sin, us needing things, right? Our limitations did not begin with the fall. It was designed. Adam and Eve were dependent on food. They needed God to provide for them. And so when we will admit that, I'm needy, but God is not, it's freeing. I can say, listen, I just can't do anymore. I've got limitations here. I have needs. I'm dependent on God. I'm dependent on others. When we'll admit that, we can just say, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure how to handle this situation. We can just stop and breathe, right? We can embrace the fact that we need rest, that we have limits and need to set certain boundaries. We can admit that we need other people. We can rejoice that we need each other as the church. We can be needy because we know our God is not. Think about what good news this is when we're suffering, right? When we're afraid or lonely or confused or sad, when we're facing what we faced in this last year. God, I'm limited. I don't know how to handle this. I've never been through a pandemic before. God, I'm needy. I'm weak. But you are not. You are independent. You are sufficient. Church, this is our anchor. We don't know what's coming, but we know it will not tax God. We know it will not make him needy, as much as it might make us. As much as it might expose our limitation, it will not expose any limitations in our God. This is the comfort. This is the hope. This is the anchor that we need. Let's look up and remember that we are needy, but our God is not. As we come to the Lord's Supper, we're coming to a reminder of our need. Speaking of which, would someone mind getting me a little set of cup and juice? I need that. I'm forgetful. But in our forgetfulness, in our dullness, we need this reminder. Thank you, Calvin. We need this visible symbol to assure us again of Jesus' grace and love. You see, we're weak. We start doubting. Jesus, do you really love us? Did you really do enough for me? Is this real? And Jesus knew we would need a reminder that we could see and taste and touch. He knew we would need this. He knew our weakness. So we need this. We need to come together with other people and see them taking this with us. And to be able to say together, yeah, I need this reminder. I forget that Jesus died for me. I forget that I'm loved. I need this reminder that I'm looking at and tasting. I need this. So let's admit our need and receive this reminder. This reminder that out of his sufficiency, out of the overflow of his love, Jesus gave himself up to be beaten, spit upon, nailed to a cross. His body was pierced for us. His blood was poured out for us. He received the just judgment of God that we deserved. He received that on himself. All of it. There's no more judgment for us. Our sins are paid for fully. They are covered completely. We are forgiven, cleansed, and there is now no condemnation. He has met our need completely. If you have come to Jesus with this need, if you're trusting in his sufficiency alone for your salvation, if you're following him with his people, then we invite you to join us. As we take the bread in our hands, we are looking in faith to Jesus' body, given as a substitutionary sacrifice for us. Matthew 26, verse 26 says, "Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, 'Take, eat. This is my body. Take and eat.'" The cup that we take now is a symbol of Jesus' blood. He gave his very life to meet our greatest need. He did. He's given us this reminder of that. Matthew 26 goes on, it says, "And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins.'" Take and drink. If you are in Christ, if you are his, then know your need has been met fully and forever. Praise God.